Gang, how you doing? This is Tada. Um, I'm a psychotherapist and a social justice advocate, offering kind of my commentary on Andrew Yang's campaign from That Voice. So, getting right into it, I want to talk a little bit today about why people vote, and I think this is particularly important for people who are Yang Gang, looking to talk about Yang to people, as well as the people who are Yang curious, trying to vet the candidate. Um, and so before getting into everything, I'm just going to make a statement, and then I think I think what I'm talking about will explain it itself, but I want to offer you something. So Andrew Yang's been saying that the opposite of the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man that likes math. And actually, I'm going to say this is true for sure, but there's actually something that's even more true. And actually, this is it, is that the opposite of Donald Trump is a man who loves his family and is loved back. Okay? And I'll tell you a little bit why this is important. So people think there's like two reasons why people vote for candidates. And they are, one, because their policy makes sense. So people vote for Medicare for all or a climate change policy, right? And then second, people vote for people who represent their kind of emotional expression of things, like outrage at billionaires and things like that, right? Calling out certain things that are wrong that are happening around us. The thing is, though, I think what a lot of people miss, there's actually a third layer that's not spoken about barely, really. I've never really heard people talk about it. That actually, to me, really drives the elections and reasons why people vote. And it is something that actually at the bottom of almost every relationship that we're in, and actually has a humongous influence, and I would say a lot more so than number 2 and number 1. Okay, and that is something that as psychotherapists, what we call attachment. So what attachment is a study of how early childhood experiences affect our later life relationships. Okay, so that is essentially about our relationship to our caregivers or parents. So caregivers or parents are extremely powerful figures to us when we're children, and how we interact with them and the kind of emotions we feel about that deeply affect how we go about our relationships later in life. Okay, so I think the really simple example is like if you're dating, you keep dating people that remind you of your parents. And if it's unconscious, probably like the part of your parents that is not healthy for you. Like that part of the parents, part of your personality or experience of your parents that kind of are hurtful to you. We always, as the child part of our psychology keeps wanting to play that out and resolve something. So we keep getting into relationships that resemble our parents, and usually the parts of our relationship with them are not processed. Okay. So why does this have so much to do with elections? Is because essentially elections are about choosing parental figures for a group of people, right? Because by default, politicians, especially like somebody like a president, is going to have an immense amount of power over you, and you're choosing that person. So it is no wonder that how we choose our presidential candidates or anybody else to office is directly related to the emotional issues we have tied up with our childhood. So one way to understand this is that Donald Trump, right? A lot of women voted for Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is an openly misogynist person. It's like grab him by the pee, like that kind of stuff, right? So by any logical stretch of the imagination, I think it'd be pretty hard to vote for Trump as a woman, right? But something we don't consider, especially white women, right, because Trump is white, that a lot of women have had fathers like Donald. And actually, that would go for men too. A lot of men have had fathers like Donald. So if you want to ask yourself, what do you think the childhood experiences were like of those people who voted for Donald Trump? I guarantee you're going to see a very high ratio of childhood stories that really resemble a patriarch like Donald Trump being in their family, right? So this is something that's really important. I think you're probably hearing this and going like, oh my God, right? So it's not, so the surface behavior is like build the wall. That's like the policy people are voting for. And the second surface behavior is like, we're calling out the establishment, da 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 da. But actually the deep underlying layer is there with, this entangled relationship with somebody that resembles our childhood experience. So that's what's tangled in there. And so why is this so important to picking a candidate, right? Because taking out whether I'm Yang Gang or whether you're Yang Gang or not, what's really important in considering a candidate is that not necessarily what their policy is, that's one layer, not necessarily just how they represent your outrage or things like that. The most important layer actually is, would you want this person to be your parent? Would you want them to have control and power over you? Would you want them to be your caretaker? Do you trust them as that? That really actually is the shadow number one criteria, and so much better if we can get it up to our actual number one criteria that we're actually aware of. And that's the difference, right? We make conscious choices. So in my observation, Andrew has actually something that is incredibly, sorry, a bit of a sneeze there. That is incredibly important for somebody we are considering for office at that position to be in this kind of caretaking position, right? And that is that grace and forgiveness. Because think about it. Who would you want to be your president or your parent, basically, when you've done something wrong? Okay? And something I think you notice when you hear people like Bernie or Elizabeth Warren talk, they point to people like billionaires, and point to how inherently evil they are, basically, in many ways. But when actually you hear Andrew say, you hear that, yes, the behavior is morally reprehensible. There is also in the system too much wealth inequality and too much poverty. That there's no question about that. But what he also says, if you pay attention, is that our system is incentivized the wrong way. And a lot of CEOs and a lot of rich people, they would actually lose their jobs. Or like if they stop doing what they're doing. The whole economy is incentivized that way, and they're working within that system. So we need to take the responsibility to change the system that way. So if you think about it, what kind of parent would you want? Versus, when you compare those different approaches. And for me personally, I would want somebody who understands that my behavior is guided by incentives, and my incentives can be shifted. I could be called out for what I'm doing wrong, but also be understood why I'm doing something wrong, and be still like understood as a part of society. So that's just like one small example. I think it also applies to people, let's say, who are like white supremacist, white nationalist, right? It's not just about calling people out for what they're doing wrong and say it's reprehensible. It's understand like what are the social conditions, what are the incentives that are driving people that way. And I do believe America really needs a president who can be such a type of parent, right? And that is the difference. Because if you're just looking at somebody who is representative of your frustrations and your anger and things like that, there's a lot to choose from. But that still doesn't, the thing is, if you look at Donald Trump, people chose Donald Trump for that reason, but that doesn't make him a good president. Because what you see is that Donald, in his real life, you look at the relationship he has with his closest people, like his family, and you see the corrosiveness, you see the lies, you see the weird, icky tensions, you see the manipulation. You also see that Donald was abused by his own father, and he's carrying that energy into the White House. Right? That psychological energy. And that informs everything that he does at that place. So from this place, I'm saying that the opposite of Donald Trump is not just an Asian man who likes math. That is some funny shit. But the real opposite, my kitty, the real opposite of Donald Trump is a man who's loved by his family and loves them back. And on this place, in this criteria, I think by far Andrew's family of Evelyn, who like looks at him so adoringly, and understands his policies, is advocate for them. When you look at Melania and Donald Trump's relationship, you can see it's totally frozen, right? And he has his two boys. One of them is autistic, and he's saying like, hey, this my child, regardless of what people may say or how autistic people are seen, my child has inherent value that's beyond their economic value. They have this human value, and as a society in general, we need to honor the intrinsic value of every human being. Like, so it's not just about it's not just about UBI and those policies. The real reason why people would vote for Andrew Yang is because they see that he is a good parent. And from everything that I've seen, my best trust is that he is a pretty good parent. And he has also a great family as an example to showcase a family that is marginalized as people of color, a family that is willing to get therapy to get through hard times, because Andrew is very transparent about going through hard times and like maybe needing counseling and stuff, and is willing to provide that for citizens, right? And so a family that is also like, we love our child for who they are. Like, these are like really the qualities we're looking for. And what you need to understand is that his policies are an expression, right? His proposed policies are an expression of his ideal. Okay, so his ideology, his expressed ideology and policies are really foundationally based in his behavior as a parent. So this is the number one thing. So if you're young and curious, you might be like, oh, actually, like, look at, if instead of being like, oh, is this UBI a bad idea? Like, I know there's a lot of that. Ground yourself maybe a little bit and like, I'm not going to make it up for you. I have my own opinions, but you can go and say like, how is Andrew as a parent? And look at how everybody else is in the field and imagine them as parents and be like, who do I want to be my parent? And then look at the policies from that lens. If you're Yang Gang, understand that it's not just about putting out Andrew's policies, it's about who he is as a human being, right? Because the number one thing that people are struggling with probably is trust of politicians, which is totally understandable, right? But what bridges that is by showing Andrew has a human capacity. And this is particularly important for showcasing Asian candidate, because traditionally Asians are seen as bad parents, like tiger parents, like overly meritocratic, hard pushing, inhumane. So there's a lot of barriers to overcome to showcase Andrew as a human parent. Okay. But anyways, I hope that this video is helpful in your understanding a little bit more what are the behaviors that drive electoral politics. Again, the summary is that it's not, the most important layer is not policy and ideas. It's not about emotional representation. It's about attachment. It's about early childhood experiences, about family. And that's the most important layer. And, and when I say that, it might not be the layer that gets people interested, because somebody's a UBI person, they might drift over to Andrew. But what actually clinches a vote is that piece around early childhood experience. And actually, I'm going to say one thing, is that one of the reasons why UBI is so important is because it changes our trust relationship with government, because it's essentially government as caretaker, as caregiver, a parent, saying that I trust you with, I'm going to give you the resources to succeed. And so it changes the parent-child dynamic between government and civilian. So that is the thing for us to understand. And that might really help with your yanging. So just wanted to put that out there as a piece of information. Cheers.